I notice when people use the word private, it still gets us a little bit closer to the fundamental thing that we wanted to get away from. And that is that there are things inside of you that need to be different.
Okay.
And if they could be different, then you'd behave differently.
Welcome back to Act Root to Fruit. My name is Marcel Tassara, and this is a podcast about being as precise as possible in the work that we do with our clients. For those of you interested in practicing from the contextual behavioral science approach, including ACT and FAP and clinical behavior analysis and compassion-focused therapy, how can we be working flexibly and not contributing to any kind of control agenda that's so ingrained in our mentalistic way of being as humans? So excited, so excited to bring you Mitch Fryling today. We get into this word function, and that's really at the heart of a lot of what I've been after here in this podcast. So looking at behaviors as functions and looking at how interbehavioral thinking and psychology contribute to the work that you do and how you approach clients and the dilemmas that clients bring and obviously our own, assuming you have dilemmas too, like me. And then we get into private versus public events, the thinking and feeling versus, what's being seen and witnessed by outside observers. Mitch Fryling is a professor at Cal State University. He's a chair of the Division of Special Education and Counseling there. He's works a lot in behavioral theory and philosophy and writes in those topics a lot with Dr. Linda Hayes, who he did his PhD with at Reno, and is the current editor of the Psychological Record. Before we get to the episode, I just want to mention that I was drawn to ACT and the contextual behavioral sciences in part because of how in line they are with my own personal philosophy and values, and also because of the experiential components to the training. And I'm a firm believer that we can memorize all the words in ACT books and listen to all the podcasts and interviews and go to all of the conferences, and yet until we start to metabolize some of this in our own lives and put into practice some of these principles, it's kind of hard to communicate that and be a functional contextualist with clients. I'm a firm believer that the work that we do in our own lives as therapists to show up vulnerably for our stuff pays off tenfold in what the ways that we can show up for our clients. So that's what the training group's all about. I'm a firm believer that the work that we do in our own lives as therapists to show up vulnerably for our stuff pays off tenfold in what the ways that we can show up for our clients. So that's what the training group's all about. Hope you enjoy this episode with my man Mitch Fryling. So yeah, I'm excited to chat about this stuff. One of the things I keep thinking about as I was getting into some of your articles, especially the public-private stuff and function, I just kept thinking about how interesting it is, and how can we make this a discussion that isn't assuming that people have memorized everything you and Linda have written, Because I could sit here and geek out and try to show off and impress you or something like that, or whoever, and I don't know how useful that'll be for other folks, And know that. I don't know,
Yeah, I agree. It can get kind of burdensome to assume that someone's gonna, try to get through all of the stuff that might not be immediately interesting, I suppose, but there are lots of different, you just mentioned a couple of topics, I think, that are important. So you mentioned the idea of function, you mentioned the public-private dichotomy. Mm-hmm. So I've found myself trying to explain some parts of some things as a way to kind of I guess, get people sort of interested or get to know the interbehavioral position kind of little by little, because I think it's really hard to dump up the whole thing all at once.
So yeah, let's get into the function stuff. I'm excited to talk about that, and I really was digging on some of your functional perspectives.
Yeah.
I feel like it's as close as one can get to taking a hallucinogen without, without ingesting any chemicals. It's trippy, man.
All right. Yeah, it's a cool topic, right?
Yeah.
I just wrote down to myself, why function is cool. Why would I be so interested in that word or that topic? And it just strikes on so many issues, I think, that emphasize interbehavioral thinking. So for one, in behavioral circles, the word function is used like, it's like function this, function that, could I be more functional?
Yeah.
Or this is functional this. It's like, let's be, function is the, like, we could just call everything function and
or contextual.
Yeah, like we're like making it, and like casual conversation, right? Like, yeah, I just want it to be more like functional. But
a functional space, kind of a contextual functional space we could create.
Yeah. But it's like, it's not used in a very consistent way. Actually, it's pretty confusing. And Skinner really used that word kind of in a causal way, although I don't think he wanted to. But, functions kind of ended up being the reasons why someone did something or the cause of behavior.
Once you know the function, you know the why, kind of,
Yeah, kind of why it's happening. And then, the idea, and it's a really great idea. I really like this idea. And I remember liking it in graduate school a lot. That then you would know, what to change. And, of course, usually that's something in the environment and is definitely a step above the whole idea that the cause is inside the person. So function as cause is Skinner's thing. And actually a lot of people still use that word that way. It's the cause. People use it as the purpose, which is closely related, the purpose of something, I guess. But I guess the purpose of something is different than what caused it. So then there's like,
that is a question I have about that. Sorry, go ahead. I'm going to ask the question.
Well, yeah, like that, both of those are kind of, so I think function as purpose is kind of how we would talk to anybody, like, we're going to a function or an event or something, but yeah, either of those are, that's two different ways I think that behaviorists find themselves using the word function as purpose and cause.
Yeah, that's something I often think about in terms of the therapy world. When I think about one of the confusions I've had along my journey has been, well, so if function is what you get, if what the client gets from their from their action, then how do we consider what their motive was? Because that's kind of when I think of function as purpose, I'm thinking more of like what's the purpose of me doing this now? What am I getting? Because oftentimes it's not the same thing.
Yeah. Purpose and what you're getting, you're saying?
Yeah.
And motivation, you're sort of.
Well, or consequence, consequence versus purpose.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people probably talk about maybe purpose is what you're saying in this context as kind of a motivational type thing.
Okay.
But in behavioral thinking, that's still tied. Well, I'm talking, I guess, in I'll say traditional behavioral thinking. I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's still tied to the consequence because those concepts, motivational operations are tied to reinforcement and whatnot in behavioral thinking.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I guess but to take it back to the kind of mixed use of the word I was kind of getting at some of that in terms of like when it's so overused, it gets kind of dicey as to what it actually is pointing to.
Yeah, well, the word can kind of start to become less useful if we're not really sure what it's even being, when someone says that word to me, I have to pick up from some other, the context of the conversation to try to figure out how they're using it. And they might not know themselves because it's used in so many different ways.
Okay.
I was thinking about this word, kind of thinking about us meeting today, and the word function is also used in the whole idea of functional contextualism, which is almost like it's also used in kind of an applied to allude to applied things, I think, at times too, that it's more useful if it's applied and it's kind of focused on clinical issues. But again, another use of function that I don't know, like what the function is actually referring to. Is it referring to the purpose of something or the cause of it? Or so, I think so, like an idea like causality, just thinking about interbehavioral thinking, that's really kind of a core issue, that there wouldn't be one thing that's causing something. We wouldn't be interested in the cause because there isn't a cause. It's a lot more complicated than that in interbehavioral thinking. In fact, it's a field of factors that we're interested in, and none of them cause anything.
Can we say collectively they cause?
Sure, things are still determined, but they're determined, if you want to say, by the collectivity of things that are all present. Yeah, that's it. I'm on board with that.
Okay.
But I think there are many problems with this idea of cause, but you end up searching for the cause if we're thinking about things that way. And that, I don't know, that could sort of get us off track, I think, overall. If, first of all, we're not going to find it. We're just going to find out that it's really complicated. The more we do, the more we're going to find out that there isn't a cause. But, there's the term too, I was thinking, I've thought about this a lot. The term, this is the sort of thing I do, I guess, when I'm taking walks and stuff.
Nice.
The term also is used kind of as a way to talk down on descriptive things, so in like traditional behavior analysis, it's like, functional analysis is better than like a descriptive assessment because you're just describing things, or like, well, functional anything is seen as better. And I don't think no one actually uses the word better, but it's seen as more useful than descriptive stuff. But the thing is if a function's just a relation, which is what it is, then it's a description of something. And if you're describing a relation, that's all you're doing. You're not finding the cause of the relation or the purpose of the relation. You're describing something. And it's a really, I think, sort of humbling way of looking at things too. Like, God, it's really complicated. There are lots of things to explore here, and lots of functions.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a much more descriptive term in interbehavioral thinking. And it sort of loses its bite then. Function and description are sort of not really that different, maybe, than, what's all this big deal about function versus description? I don't know.
Well, I'm wondering about how do you get past just looking at topography if you're considering describing things?
I don't know what, I guess I'm not sure if I know what you mean by looking at topography. I think
looking past.
I think we can only look at, something in relation to something else, and topography is all anyone's looking at in relation to some other thing, and then it's a function. I mean, that, it's part of it. I think it's part of what people are interested in, is what they're doing.
Okay.
But I guess, it's coming up probably because of the whole topography versus function, and the over focus on what people are doing, and less of a focus on why they're doing it, or in interbehavioral thinking, or in what's participating in the field with which that particular behavior is occurring. Not the cause of it, not the purpose of it, but not to just look at the topography. And certainly we don't want to do that.
Okay. All right. So you said functions are relationships.
Yeah, that's sort of, that's in,
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I'm overly asserting myself saying that, but yeah, that's how I look at functions. That's how interbehaviorists look at functions. Similarly to kind of just like a line, in math, where there's just a functional relationship. And it doesn't mean anything more than a description between, factors, which.
Okay. And so, and then I'm on that note, I'm wondering about something that jumped out to me in, I believe it was your article, The Pseudo-Problem of Private versus Public.
Okay.
And the line was that behaviors don't have a function, they are functions.
Yeah.
So how does that play with what you just said?
Well, I mean, so if you think, this idea that behaviors, or that functions are causes or purposes, or then there are things that are sort of properties of the behavior. So like, what is the function of the behavior? Well, there isn't a function of the behavior. Behavior is always occurring in relation to some other thing. And that could be the function that you're analyzing, but the function isn't the cause of the function. I mean, it's kind of like going wacky, So if functions are descriptions of relationships, then there can't be other functions that are causes of, but listen to us though. This is part of this issue with this word. It's like, it's a function of a function to a, what are we, in the end, what we're doing is looking at a relationship. And I think that, that idea that, behaviors are functions is also getting at the issue in interbehaviorism that, it's not an issue, but maybe a unique feature of it. The whole idea of interbehavior itself, that, behavior doesn't occur on its own. It's interbehavior. It's functionally related to the stimulating context. So it's I don't know, I'm sort of rambling a bit here.
No, but, I don't think so. I'm following you.
Yeah, I stand by that line in that paper, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess where I just wanted to kind of double back on is functions are relationships and so are behaviors.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds funny to me because I think we're saying something similar. Just careful, if we only talk about behavior, the tendency could be to look at it separate, and then that the function is some other thing that isn't right there participating in that field.
Okay.
I like the first part better than the second part of what you said.
What's the first part?
Functions are relationships and so are behaviors. Yes, behaviors are they're occurring in relation to other things, but I think that then we're just saying the first thing again. Yeah.
How do you describe, like, to someone who's never heard of Cantor and doesn't know what interbehaviorism is, what's your, like, I don't know, dollar store explanation of that?
Well, I don't know. The first thing I'd say is that I think all behaviorisms have a really fundamental thing that they have in common, and that is their aim to focus on developing a natural science of behavior that avoids any inner sort of hypothetical constructs that are placed within people, and that then people end up being blamed for their behavior. And so I would start by saying we're all, there's a larger similarity among the behaviorisms, regardless of what behaviorists you might be. I think that the most fundamental thing that behaviorists, I hope, are committed to is to pursuing a natural science approach to things that avoids, all of the issues that we, people being shamed, people feeling, systems designed that blame people for their issues. Now, I'm already not doing the elevator speech question answer that you said, but I will say that to me, interbehaviorism is more thorough in that regard, on that note of being exceptionally detailed and specific in the commitment to developing a natural science of behavior than any other behaviorism that I know.
Okay.
And that's why I'm drawn to it, because I really, really, that idea there, that the natural science of behavior thing that avoids blaming people for their behavior is huge. It's an enormous idea. But, the truth is probably part of the difficulty is it's hard to give an elevator quick, it's hard to talk about these things quickly and accurately.
And functionally.
Yeah, we don't want to forget about the function of it all, right?
I don't want to get too lost on this, but I am interested, Cantor was around before Skinner started to do his heavy lifting, and I'm wondering why he wasn't more influenced or didn't rely more on some of Cantor's work to untangle some of his own stuff that he was working on.
Yeah, I think, I think first, given that thing that I think, there's some similarity, like I just said, some important similarity. I think Skinner was interested in other things. I think he was interested in going about this whole, pretty, wild idea, especially, at the time that, your behavior isn't caused by things in you. It's hard to get rid of that idea even today. I think Skinner was interested in research and collecting data and, went about it in a different way as far as developing that natural science. So I don't know how influenced he was by Cantor, and I don't know why he wasn't influenced more, other than to think that they were just they were interested in very different things.
Okay.
Cantor was a philosopher.
Yeah.
And while Skinner was, wrote a lot of theoretical stuff, I don't know that was the main thrust of his work, at least not at the beginning, I suppose.
Okay. That's
probably, also a lot is said about the differences between Skinner and Cantor. And I've been thinking about this too, and how I talk about things. And I'm sensitive to the fact that they're contrasted, at least in my work, for the purposes of focusing on the unique features of interbehaviorism, and less so, to dismiss, Skinner's work or something like that. So I don't know if it says, why didn't they work more together during their own careers? I imagine it was that they were focused on different things. Why now? It could be the same. Behaviorists are still largely, interested in data and experimentation.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. I was giggling to myself out loud a couple of lines of your articles and, you know, the physiologists of the future or now. You know, so a jab or two there that were pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So what else do we want to talk about as far as function? What do you have
Well,
there?
I think too much is made of the distinction between function as being something different from description. And I think that's a really core thing that I would be good for people to kind of take away of an interbehavioral approach to things. And, you know, that doesn't mean that then there might not be people who are studying functions as descriptions in the context of clinical work. And to me, in fact, that would probably keep them closer to what's happening also if they avoided function as cause or purpose. So I think the word has sort of taken us away from things a bit.
Can you say more about that, what you just said at the end? I don't know if I caught the thrust of that.
Well, I think the more descriptive...
Not about taking us away, but yeah, but before that, yeah.
Like about function as descriptive and...
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think the more descriptive we can be and the more tuned into the field we can be, the more close we'll be to what's happening. And I think we just have to be careful when words take us away. And I think descriptive language keeps us very close to things.
Okay. Yeah, and when you say field, you're referring to a palette of things that are contributing to my hand moving right now, or...
Sure. Yep. The interbehavioral field or the psychological event.
Yeah.
You know, this is a term that Cantor wrote about, proposed it's a construct to kind of capture what we're studying in psychology. But it is sure a conglomerate of all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so kind of what I'm hearing you say is like the more that we can have an appreciation of the different elements that are acting on us or our clients or whatever we're focused on.
Yep.
The less we're going to say, oh, it's just the wind blowing, or...
Well, we just don't want to overlook something important. And, you know, it's complicated. Things are complicated, much more complicated than non-field-based orientations allow for.
Okay.
You know, I think that once we start thinking about causes, we start to focus on something, we start to, you know, think about something as more important than some other thing. It's really complicated. And the whole interbehavioral field idea, in my experience, lands much more quickly with clinicians for that reason, because it's like, boom, yeah, it's complicated. It's really complicated. It's not just one thing. It's not, this doesn't just work that way. It works that way with this person in this situation, and only if this is also happening, and da-da-da-da-da. You know, that's the interbehavioral field right there. Like it's, so I think the more descriptive we are, once we sort of drop this whole thing about, you know, causes and purposes and all that, then we can start to get closer to all that. And it is all of that. It's complicated.
Okay. Do you get any feedback ever from clinicians or BAs about like, well, why even try to figure it out if it's so complicated?
Well, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't focus. Yes, I think sometimes, yes, to answer your question, which I don't know if I'm doing a good job of, but yes, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't focus on something that seems to really be participant in that field. Obviously, you can't, you know, you don't want to go bananas, and you
Mhm.
can't do everything. But um, yeah, so I think that you might have a field orientation doesn't mean that you can't focus, and that meaning in your clinical work or in research or whatever. Just careful not to forget that what's really going on is a lot more complicated
Okay.
than that, and you could overlook something really important.
Okay. Yeah. So function does not equal cause.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Not only does function not equal cause, I don't think there's a cause, period. Um, that's just as far as interbehavioral thinking goes.
Okay.
Things are determined, but not by a cause.
What's a thing?
Well, if we're focusing on, behavior, what we
Mhm.
do is influenced by, as you said, kind of the collectivity of
Okay.
things, but not just one thing.
Okay. And what is real?
Dang. What is real? Well, I mean, I don't think that there's, I think in the writing that I suppose I've done some of, about reality, we end up talking about reality in the sense that we would like to discourage people from the idea that they are studying the reality, and rather understand that there isn't a reality. Um, and similarly, that they won't discover some ultimate truth about that, also.
Yeah.
So,
So kind of like the song Hotel California isn't inherently good.
I mean, you know, there's um, there's not one real thing, I suppose, if we want to talk about what's real.
Okay.
Now, I don't know, that seems like a weird thing for me to be saying. I feel like I need to unpack it with like several paragraphs of something, but
You can.
um,
I'm happily all ears.
and to appreciate the fact that you're also a participant in that.
Mm-hmm.
So interbehaviorists don't spend a lot of time thinking about uh, that. And I think in particular in relationship to the whole concept of truth and truth criteria and whatnot, I find all of that, I don't know, but I find myself not interested in wondering if something ends up meeting truth criteria or not, because I don't think things are true.
Okay. And is that's in line with the functional contextual perspective, right? There isn't some ultimate.
Sure. Yeah. Although the whole, anything I can read about functional contextualism ends up talking about truth criterion and how there are other truth criterion with other worldviews. And I don't find myself, I think the more important thing is the natural science aim, and that should be what is really the focus of, be it any sort of behaviorism. But I find myself less interested in all of that talk of metaphors and whatnot. Not in a like bad way, but
Yeah.
just doesn't, I don't know what it's doing.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I asked that question because it was an interesting point that Steve made to me recently when I interviewed him about how, our biggest arguments with our clients and in general probably with other people are what's real and what's not real.
You mean as far as, I don't know, give me I don't know, give me something more to work with as far as a everyday example.
Yeah.
Like, did that
Well,
really happen?
we could say let's go to Hotel California. That's a really good song. It just is to anybody who listens to that should appreciate that. It's just, was birthed from naturalness, I guess.
Yeah, but then I guess the struggle being that, so is it like objectively like really good?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that might convey what I'm trying to get at here a little bit.
Well, as soon as we understand that our experience is really complicated, our whole history is really individually our histories are complicated. In some ways our histories are shared as members of groups, but if that's where you are, then well, there's nothing that's really objectively, like that song is objectively good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I wouldn't even find myself, you might debate it with friends for fun or something, but whether or not it's actually truly and really good, I don't know. I don't find it. I don't know. I don't ask questions about. I don't ask those questions. I don't find myself curious about them, and I think that's because I'm an interbehaviorist.
And would you, if I were to be speaking to Mitch of pre-conversion, it would be a different.
Maybe, and I think that's all just to say that the field orientation, the dropping of the contingency idea, operant, respondent things that were much better than mentalistic things, I will add. So I'm not saying I'm against that, but looking at things from a field perspective has really made it very apparent how unique everything is, and how complicated it is.
Can you talk more about that progression? Because you're what it sounds like I'm suspecting is that your progression was one from kind of mentalistic worldview, which is what we all are trained to be, and then more of what you said, operant. What did you say? You said
respondent, kind of operant
respondent. Sure. Yep. And I'm wondering about that shift for you in seeing behavior that way to now your current view.
Well, I mean, again, if I think about what's most important, and what drew me to behavioral thinking ever, again, was seeing people being blamed for things that they did when clearly the context was being overlooked. And I have connected with that since I don't recall not connecting with that. I think that's the most fundamental thing.
Yeah.
But then there are kind of layers that take you away from that. So like once we leave, mentalism land here, blaming people for what's going on, then, okay, well, operant ideas take you away from that, right? They help you look at some part of the context that isn't blaming the person.
Yeah.
Same with respondent ideas. They definitely take you away from blaming the person. Very useful to, those models are great. Look at all of the stuff that we've done with, operant and respondent ideas. Gosh. And then there's always like, yeah, but that doesn't always totally work that way. And like, I don't know, like even when I found the reinforcer, it's still like when I took it away, it still like was happening. But like sometimes, it didn't always go like that. It wasn't, as it didn't fall in line like those ideas would have you think that it could or would. And so, the whole idea of there being an interbehavioral field that that construct captured the complexity that we're interested in, I think, better than those other ideas. That doesn't mean I'm against those ideas, by the way. I think the operant and respondent paradigms are very useful and they should be employed, you know, where they you know, where they're helpful and where people are interested in studying them more. And but they are, you know, those are constructs that are focused on a narrower part of the field, that and it's important to remember that. But you know, once I land at this field idea, you know, that things are really complicated, I'm like, crap, yeah, things are complicated, you know, where aren't they, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, it turns out some of those operant ideas and respondent ideas have been most successful in settings that are relatively less complicated. Because you know, more things can be controlled, and if everything can be controlled, sure enough, they work that way. But well, when can those things be controlled? You know, not very often, and it's not easy. So I don't know. That's sort of my progression to more interbehavioral thinking. You know, I also always thought, I guess, you know, we mentioned private events a little bit earlier. I always thought that was a little lazy, you know, like, oh, everything cool is just a private event, I guess, you know. And I remember thinking that was so cool. Like, not that I mean, I'm not dismissing the enthusiasm towards that idea, but, you know, like, oh yeah, you know, what about thinking and feeling? Oh yeah, that's there too. It's just private. Well, where does that go? It just sort of stays, you know, I don't know, it didn't seem to go all the way as far as cohering with everything else. So, you know, I still get really blown away by these ideas of, you know, that, you know, what someone's thinking and all that, that you could notice it and that it isn't in them, and how the idea that it's in them somewhere is so odd. You know, of course you can notice what someone's thinking. So, you know, I fall more and more aligned with interbehavioral thinking, the more I get to know it.
What this in and out, I guess I'm wondering, is part of the problem with seeing a private versus public environment that we kind of tend to ascribe some magic to the private, like?
Yeah, you know, I think you're right that the private ends up being, it still kind of ends up carrying some of that, well, sort of dualistic idea still. This like, oh, there's a private thing happening, that's why the public thing is happening, or you know, what's going on. So I think that's part of it. And you know, to give, if you think of how that idea came about, though, it probably was a really, and is a really good, in my view, attempt to, you know, behaviorists are careful not to call private events causes, you know, they're not causes, you know, we're not mentalists. Fair. But then what's going on, you know, there? And I don't know, that I view people as being kind of locked up in parts like that. Like, I have what I'm doing, and then I have what's happening privately, and I'm kind of doing all of it at once. And I think that, you know, the issue is, when you don't really know someone very well, it's all quite subtle. But you know, the more you get to know someone, the more you have a history with them, you know, you can see what they're thinking, and their private events aren't that private.
Yeah.
And that calls into question, you know, and I'm sure clinicians notice this too, that, you know, they see what their clients are, or notice what their clients are thinking and feeling. And that's not because they're on the inside. That's because your thoughts and feelings are your whole, you know, your whole person here responding. And so, you know, as you get to know someone more and more, you can see exactly, you what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as I was sitting in a lawn chair, and it's like, it's got the metal tubes and they're hollow inside, and there could be bugs crawling in the tube for all I know. But until they do something that that like enters into a relationship with me, whether it's a sound or they, burst through the tube or what, then they're there. And I was kind of trying to think of a way to think about that in terms of similar to these thoughts and feelings that we have.
Well, I think your thoughts and feelings, and they're there. I think the metaphor for this idea of the bugs being in the chair kind of works in the sense that they're always there, and you don't always have the experience whereby you might notice them.
Yeah. That's the observer. That's the observer's limitation, not
right.
Not my limitation as the chair.
Right. And it's also not in this, that doesn't mean those things are private and inside of you. They're right there. They're just subtle things. And I think many of us have that experience of, long relationships, for example. You just, you're mad at me right now. No, I'm not mad. I swear I'm not mad. No, you're mad. Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about at all. But again, okay, here I'm gonna challenge you on this word private. Is it okay for me to use the word private in my life?
Well, sure, I'm not.
As an interbehaviorist, if I want to be an interbehaviorist, can I use that word?
Well, I'm not here to tell. I know you're asking me what I think. So of course you can use whatever word, but I don't know why you want to. I guess I don't know what it does for you. I think it makes it easier for some of this stuff to connect with people who are still mentalistic. And it lets some kind of idea that there's still this inner outer thing going on that the whole world believes in. If you use that word, well, personally, do I mind? No. I mean, does it help you in some context communicate some idea? Maybe. But I think it helps you because it still gets to hang on to some of that stuff that,
but if I'm not ascribing some like kind of magic ethereal quality to things that are happening within my skin, or below my skin, thoughts and feelings. Okay. I guess I sometimes stumble on what's the big deal with considering it as private.
I think there's a danger, to me. I notice when people use the word private, it still gets us a little bit closer to the fundamental thing that we wanted to get away from. And that is that there are things inside of you that need to be different. Okay. And if they could be different, then you'd behave differently. I think that we could focus on something else that would probably be more helpful.
You're talking about us two in terms of what we're talking about right now? Or?
No. I mean, no. I mean, in general, I think when people are talking about that, I think, well, what are you talking about? And I have to really get it out of that concept in order to figure out, what is that person really talking about when they're talking about a private event? They're clearly not talking about a private event because that's not a thing. I mean, so then what is it? And I don't know but I have to admit, I've sort of connected. I have a hard time going back. I don't mean back in like I'm ahead, but going back to this other way that I was more familiar with thinking. Yeah. Because it just sort of has fallen apart as far as the idea that there's a thought in you or a feeling in you. I just, I think your behavior is much more complex than that allows for.
Okay.
And I don't like chopping it up that way, really.
Did it take you some time, would you say, to I mean, I would imagine as you continue to, as you move on in your life, your appreciation of these concepts broadens or whatever. What am I trying to say here?
Well,
I guess what I'm really trying to say is like, my sense is this is something that for me it takes attention and time to really wrap my head around.
Sure. It's very different. This point in particular is a difficult selling point for interbehaviorists. And by the way, this particular thing is, Linda and I, in particular, Linda Hayes, this is really kind of her thing. But I just think the more you experience life, though, at least so far for me, the more I notice that not knowing what someone was really thinking in a meeting or whatever really has to do with me not having access to a part of their history. And that's all it is. So I just notice it more and more. And I notice more when I, can notice people thinking and feeling things. I guess I just don't, I increasingly find myself less interested in the idea that there's something different happening inside of me that's separate from my public behavior. And I don't even think of my behavior as, I think we're just, individuals behaving in a context. I mean, I don't think of it as being cut up into two different parts.
Yeah.
One of the things that's very hard. I've had people tell me, I agree with everything that you say except that. I'm like, that's cool. Hey, that's the trickiest. I think that is the trickiest part probably to jump over. So if you're like right there, I don't know, let it sit with it for a minute, because
read about it. Yeah. I've really been in, I think that the morning for me, before I've got my head cluttered with a bunch of other things, and it's a good time for me to have space to think about things and chew on things,
Yeah, totally.
Maya Angelou said that in the morning, she's a genius. By the afternoon, she's just, I forgot what word she used, but some derogatory word towards herself about how stupid she was in the afternoon. I really like Emily's article from 2019. It's a little 3-pager on the clinical applications of interbehaviorism, and she uses this clay metaphor. And so I think that's a nice kind of bite-sized thing for people to start with potentially.
Sure, yeah, and I don't, I can't speak to the detail. I've read that article, I think twice, but what stands out to me is the how this field idea is so present to what's happening in a therapy context. And I'm really happy that, clinicians are relating to that idea, to the field orientation of things.
The public-private thing, one of the things I wanted to run by you was in terms of communicating how, we are able to detect what someone is thinking, that they're having thoughts and emotions. The example with like professional poker. I mean, if those guys could, they would wear welding masks, but they can't. So they wear glasses and they wear hats. You've seen that. Have you seen that?
But even then their opponents probably know what's going on, right? I mean, if they've played together a lot, they know like, hey, when Mitch is in this situation and all this has happened, I know that actually he doesn't have a straight face. You think that's a straight face, but that's only a straight face to you as the audience member at home or wherever. In fact, those players are probably really tuned into each other. It's actually a cool example.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, hmm, do we want to talk some? I don't know if we have time to talk some about this construct and event situation, and or if there's
Sure.
a nice segue into that. I don't know, because I didn't have time to read all that.
Sure. We can, it's one
Or if
of the
there's some
things. Go ahead.
or if there's some more about public-private that we didn't get to that you thought would be helpful for folks.
Um, well, again, I don't know. I think it's a hard leap, like I said. But I do, think people should ask themselves if they say they're studying private events. Um, I've heard lots of this, we got to study private events. And then they do a study and it's not on private events at all.
Hmm.
It's on something else. The thing is, it's never been studied because it's not a thing.
Wait, you
You
just
know?
acknowledged private events in saying that example.
but I mean, it's I hear sometimes of the like increasing research supporting private events or something, and I think,
Mhm.
yeah, but that wasn't on that. And actually, that's related to this idea of constructs and events too, and that you're confusing what you're studying with what you say you're studying.
Okay.
And so one of there are, I was going to say one of my favorite things about interbehaviorism, but like everything turns out is probably one of my favorite things. But Cantor was really explicit about distinguishing between constructs and events, and really that's just constructs, kind of things we say, how we talk about what we're doing, and what we're interested in, what we're studying, and noticing how often we confuse what we say about something with the thing itself.
Mm.
And this is a danger because we do a lot of talking about things. We have all sorts of terms. We have, but once we start studying the term and not the event, that's confusing the construct and the event, right?
Okay.
So, you have people sometimes doing, let's say I studied blank.
Like diffusion.
Sure, some term that's popular in an act or something. And then you think, well, what was that? Like, it wasn't that. Well, then you look, it turned out it was this and this and this exercise. Okay, so you probably did some sort of study on, stimulation with respect to, it, that when you confuse the term with what you're studying, you lose some sort of closeness to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be kind of vague. And those, in my very limited, I will say, experience looking at some of that literature, it all varies. It's all different, all sorts of different things. And I think something can be lost when those things are then, I don't know, you go to a workshop on some term, you get a protocol on some term,
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing becomes this other thing.
Okay.
Careful, not that thing's bad. Actually,
Yeah.
turns out that thing's probably pretty good as far
Yeah.
as I can tell, as far as research shows and all that. But careful not to remember what you're actually interested in.
Okay.
And Cantor really, really calls attention to that distinction. And it's one that I've really liked because I see people get confused.
Do you have any examples, like in the ACT world? I know you have an article coming up soon to be published.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those terms, where there's a values-based exercise or a diffusion exercise or a mindfulness, again, all good. But when they become a thing that is packaged and delivered, and then it just sort of gets it, you could risk applying it sloppily, kind of, don't forget that's a construct that is applied, that's those are words that we use to talk about blank. And that part I think is sometimes missing, in that and then you're getting away from the event, the thing that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And you can avoid that, by the way. I mean, that's not to say terms are bad, or that we should just, all stay as close to the event as we can and never say anything at all, which, might be cool for a while, but I don't know what that would lead to. Probably nothing, right? But to just be cautious about that. And I think, especially, I think you see lots of interest in behavior analytics circles, which is great, by the way. But, you start throwing around these terms and I say, what are you doing? Like, what are that? Well, I gave them a worksheet. Okay, well, like when, or like, how did it, like, for what? It just, something can get lost. So sort of a word of, the distinction between constructs and events is really just a cautionary kind of careful not to get too into, then a term about a this and a this, and pretty soon I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. I got
kind of like the menu is not the meal. Is this
sure? Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested to see what kind of feedback you get on your article.
Sure, me too. Hope someone reads it.
Well, they will. Yeah. And yes, I think I really appreciate your philosophical approach, and it helps me broaden my thinking repertoire and whatnot around all this stuff,
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and ideally, it helps people also, like I said, stay closer to what's happening. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to it, that, it keeps us close to the complexity of what's happening, keeps us away from mentalistic thinking, and to me, those are pretty major things.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a good time for behavioral kind of thinking. I think it's definitely evolving on the whole. And, I too have found myself interested in kind of I guess what you'd call the CBS work, in the sense that it's complicated work. And I think that there's a field nature to it that's sort of waiting to be named. Because it's, again, kind of what's happening and what everyone is really talking about. Probably.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and wit here with me. And I'm going to post links to a couple of articles. I think I'll probably post Our Thoughts Private and Overcoming the Pseudo-Problem of Private Events. I think that those are both like open source articles. I'm not sure, but I'll
I
make
think
sure.
so too.
Yeah. And also post Emily's article too that I mentioned.
Oh, perfect.
And maybe a link to Hotel California as well.
Is it really a good song?
And of course I was not referencing the Eagles. I was referencing the Gypsy Kings. Okay, because the Eagles suck. I mean, come on, they really suck. I was joking. Por el camino del desierto